Once implantation begins, the trophoblast cells are going to give rise to a second cell type. This is called the syncytial trophoblast cells. These cells will invade the endometrium, and the trophoblast cells will be renamed the cytotrophoblast. So the cytotrophoblast and the syncytial trophoblast are going to give rise to the fetal components of the placenta. We still have an inner cell mass, and we can still see the blastocyst cavity. During the second week, what will happen is another cavity will form. That cavity is going to be called the amniotic cavity. The amniotic cavity is lined by cells from the inner cell mass that we now call epiblast cells. The amniotic cavity is also going to be lined by amnioblasts. In addition to the inner cell mass giving rise to epiblast cells, they will also give rise to hypoblast cells. The hypoblast cells then will line what has now become the primary yolk sac. Prior to this, this was called the blastocyst cavity. So we changed the name to primary yolk sac once the amniotic cavity is seen. In addition to the hypoblast cells, cells of the exocoelomic membrane line the primary yolk sac. All of these structures are surrounded by the cytotrophoblast. If we look at this website from the Human Developmental Anatomy Center of a 9-day embryo, what we can see is here the embryo that's implanted, and we can see the bilaminar disc with the hypoblast and the epiblast. We can see an amniotic cavity, and we can see a primary yolk sac. These cells are surrounded then by the developing placenta out here, where we'll see cytotrophoblasts and syncytial trophoblasts. So at day 10 of development now, the cytotrophoblast and syncytial trophoblast have invaded the endometrium, and they have come into contact with the maternal blood vessels. The embryo itself is a bilaminar disc consisting of an epiblast and a hypoblast, and above the epiblast is the amniotic cavity. Below the hypoblast is the primary yolk sac. Surrounding the amnioblast and exocoelomic membrane, that is surrounding the embryo, and between the embryo and the placenta, a layer of mesoderm will begin to form and is called extraembryonic mesoderm. The significance of the syncytial trophoblasts coming into contact with the maternal blood supply is that the syncytial trophoblasts can make human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG. The importance of HCG is it's going to feed back onto the corpus luteum of the ovary, which will continue production of progesterone. HCG is what is detected in the pregnancy kits that are bought today. And HCG can be detected in a pregnancy test by about day 14 of pregnancy, or at about 28 days after the beginning of the woman's last menstrual period. As soon as the lacuna are formed and the blood supply then of the mother communicates with the placenta, then HCG can be detected. The next stage of development at week 2 is that spaces begin to develop within the extraembryonic mesoderm. You notice the extraembryonic mesoderm then surrounding the embryo with its epiblast and hypoblast, the amniotic cavity, and the primary yolk sac. If we look at this image from the Human Developmental Anatomy Center, we can see now this later stage of development. Here we have the embryo, there's the bilaminar disc, and now here we have that extraembryonic mesoderm, which is developing these spaces or lacunae within it. You can also notice the syncytial trophoblast coming into contact with these spaces in the endometrium where we're going to have the maternal blood supply come in contact with the syncytial trophoblasts. A little bit later in development, what will happen is those lacunae will begin to coalesce and form a coelom called the extraembryonic coelom. So now what we will have is an embryo suspended by a connecting stalk lying within this extraembryonic coelom. The extraembryonic coelom is going to become the chorionic cavity. There will be 2 layers of mesoderm that line the extraembryonic coelom, a somatopleural and a splanchnopleural mesoderm. In addition, we can see the amniotic cavity, the primary yolk sac, the epiblast, and the hypoblast. Here you can see the connecting stalk connecting the embryo to the placenta. So by the beginning of the 3rd week, this is what the embryo looks like. A bilaminar disc in between an amniotic cavity and a primitive yolk sac sitting within an extraembryonic coelom. The next stage that's going to occur at the beginning of the 3rd week through the beginning of the 4th week is gastrulation. If we look back to this website one more time, we can see where at 15 to 17 days this is what the embryo looks like.